Hello, you've reached Lisa Muggeridge talking again, and I wanted to do an unplanned video responding to Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson's epic fallout and actually discussing the actual consequences on your pocket, which you will not get in the newspapers, the Telegraph, the New Statesman, the Guardian, the Express, the Mail, the Sun, the Mirror. They will be poring over every single revelation while they get catharsis because Dominic Cummings is just saying what we already know. We have the most venal and stupid Westminster media culture imaginable, upheld by Newsnight, Question Time and the Daily Politics, and in a constant circle on Twitter. And they are absolutely unfit to be near power, and they have caused a sclerosis that means that men like Boris Johnson and his school friends have not only damaged this country irreparably, but have failed upwards. Boris Johnson has failed up so many times because of the dysfunction of his class that he's ended up in the only job he could hit: Prime Minister. Now, while this culture lock everybody else out of the processes of democracy because they believed that austerity meant that democracy would be over and they would just take precedence, while they can't sell their newspapers, we face real consequences. Now, the UK had become synonymous with uncertainty and risk as a consequence of the Brexit referendum. On every global risk report received by a company or a country after Brexit for several years, we were synonymous with uncertainty and risk. This was a problem because we had been one of the most stable economies in the world, and the entire prime of our economy was based on our stability. Our housing market is overvalued by we don't know how much, a very lot, and this is underpinned by an enormous debt bubble. And in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, people treated London property as an investor's safe haven. Now, our housing bubble is structured thus. The centre of London is extremely expensive property. This is where these investors sheltered their money. It is surrounded by a big fat ring of property with a massively overvalued rental market and residential properties underpinned by mortgages. This underpins a southeast where there are enormous numbers of mortgages with enormously overvalued properties. This pulls up housing prices in the rest of the country. But the structure of the London housing bubble with its rental market and this investor property means that can pop like that. It is a fragile housing bubble, which is exacerbated by structural problems in our financial institutions. Now, our financial institutions like the Bank of England have offset stability and managed to avoid a financial crisis since the Brexit referendum. This was actually a miracle. This was actually something close to a miracle. And because of the efforts of UK businesses, UK solicitors, UK people, the economy has stabilised because of our institutions, our health service, our social care, our housing system. We have stabilised naturally, even with the dysfunction in Westminster. And we were starting to generate the appearance of stability because Labour had danced themselves out of the picture, have proved themselves unfit and dangerous to govern and unfit to be anywhere near power. They are now unelectable ever again, regardless of what Boris Johnson does, and this handed Boris Johnson financial stability. Because we have blown this chance after the Brexit referendum, where the entire country has worked to stabilise this country, the UK now goes back to the top of those global financial risk reports. This impacts the cost of the borrowing that we make. The deficit argument that was spurious and a pretext for austerity after the financial crisis now becomes a problem. The perception we cannot manage a deficit and that our borrowing costs should increase is guaranteed. As our borrowing costs increase and our housing market corrects and we become a source of further instability, we will then be held responsible for every consequence afterwards. But the question is our political stability. Boris Johnson was handed political stability on a plate at a period in time where Europe and the US were actually seeking to repair relationships where we could have redefined our relationship. This is gone. The immaturity of these two men on display with full volume to the rest of the world means that is now gone. The US will look towards the Pacific Basin. Europe will look down the Eurasian steppe, and their relationships with each other will not be using that as an intermediary because we have shown ourselves as incapable, with Dominic Cummings' little temper tantrum telling the world what we already know. Now, all the Westminster newspapers will be sat there and they will be poring over every revelation and pretending that they did not know that the media culture that they are part of has locked rot in the front benches of Parliament, and what's on display with Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson is the consequence. In actual fact, the backbenches function fine, but global risk reports are not concerned with the backbenches. We are now in a situation where we have blown and undone all the work done since Brexit to show that this country can be stable, and we will not get that opportunity again. We will be top line on global risk reports for the next 12 months at least. Then our status will literally rapidly fall down. The position of our economy in the world rankings is based on our duff economics and our duff measures of GDP, which will change, and gradually we will fall off. And as the country turns into the cold, this media culture who cannot sell their newspapers, who have done this to us, will start seeking who to blame. But they can't blame benefit claimants because they just accidentally killed 100,000 people while Labour sought them out to actively abuse them. They can't blame immigrants because actually we need immigrants and we can no longer attract them because geographically and economically there's no reason for immigrants to come here. The likelihood is that they'll probably turn on Muslims, but because actually the Silk Roads cover several Muslim countries, we can no longer do that. So the question is which groups that they will decide are to blame, and you should watch Twitter to figure out which groups they are going to target. But I want you to pay attention to Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, because they are the two men that mean that this country will no longer be able to function in the world, and that it will be your children's generation and their children who have to fix this mess. And in the meantime, we are about to start seeing brain drain, we are going to see a correction in our housing market, and we are going to see borrowing costs escalating as the world moves on without us. And we are the country holding the baby for all the foreign policy escapades of the last 30 years as the US turns to the Pacific Basin and turns to Europe. And as tensions increase and the world settles, there are, the balance of world power is now changing. The UK is now left holding the baby. And we are holding the baby because of this culture around Westminster who can no longer sell their newspapers, who have their wall of hate in the corner of the newsagents that we have to ignore, and who have a stranglehold on Westminster media output at the BBC and the front benches. And the problem at the core of it is not media, it's class. It's that these people are school friends. And while we have a healthy higher education sector, the replacement of any academic reputation by Oxford University and the London School of Economics so that they can be a networking opportunity for the offspring of these people's children mean that we no longer have what we need to traverse this crisis. And it will be felt by you. It will begin soon. Your house prices, your house value, the products you want to buy, the trading environment for your business. And as we go into decline, they will be looking to blame somebody. And I want you to remember Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson and how much fun it was to watch this little outburst as these two men showed that we did not have the maturity in Westminster to be considered a country relevant to the rest of the world. So I'm going to sign off now. I've had a little rant. Somebody mentioned yesterday that they were upset that I had discussed Jackie Aina and Joe Biden before discussing Dominic Cummings, and I said actually Dominic Cummings telling us what we already know is not news. The problem is the way that he is doing it. Whereas the choice of Jackie Aina as a YouTuber that Joe Biden was interviewed by is about the US learning from what has just happened with Trump. These two men were at the core of Brexit, and they are the two men whose names you need to remember. Because what they have just done is told us all what we already know, but they have told the rest of the world that we cannot stabilise after the mess that they have made.